I'm Angela Kennecke, a veteran journalist with 30 years in television news and an investigative reporter. But for the purpose of this podcast, I'm just a mom trying to find my way after the loss of a child in the opioid epidemic. I am grieving out loud, using my platform on TV and on social media to try to stop the stigma of addiction and get more people into treatment so that no other family has to go through the devastation that I and my family have experienced at the loss of our 21-year-old Emily. Today I am joined by Delaine Shay, the author of And Then We Laughed, a Memoir of Hope and Healing. Delaine's book came out about a year ago. And how long did it take for you to write the book, Delaine?
It took 7 years.
7 years?
I was in a writer's group for over 20 years, and I would write short stories about my life, some funny, some sad. And then 7 years ago, I had a strong desire put on my heart that I needed to put it into a book. And so I hired a young gal to help me organize it because it was too overwhelming. That process took over 2 years.
What was on your heart? What story did you feel that you needed the world to hear?
I needed the world to hear that you can make it through tragedies and traumas, multiple. You can make it through that, and you can still have hope and healing and laughter. My brother, my only brother, was 16 months older than me. He was killed when my dad accidentally backed over him.
So this is the kind of trauma, horrific incident, and the scar on your family, I cannot imagine, not just the death of your young brother, but the fact that it was inadvertently at the hands of your father.
Yes.
And that guilt. What did that do to your family?
Yes.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 2 years and 10 months old. And
so not really aware.
Yeah, but I say that exact age because I have grandchildren that I have watched each one of them when they were that age, and I saw how interactive they were, and if somebody left, how overwhelming it could be for them. And 2 weeks after my brother died, my mother had to go to the hospital for emergency surgery for a tumor on her ovary, which, thank God, it was benign. But Mom was gone for 2 weeks, and I thought she was gone forever. Of course, that's in retrospect.
Right, but the psychological trauma imprinted on your brain at such an impressionable age certainly had to affect everything else that happened after that.
And you asked how it impacted my family. Some years later, when my mother's only brother, who was 16, he was just 6 years older than me, so he was kind of like a brother, and he was driving home from church to get his pick up Grandma and Grandpa, and a drunk driver hit Tommy. He was 16. He flew out of the car and had a head injury, and he died.
So your mother lost her son and her brother.
Yes. And then just weeks after my brother died, my uncle died, my dad had his first nervous breakdown. We were at church, Mom and we 4 girls were at church and Sunday school, and we came home. And I was so excited to rush in and see Dad because he made dinner when we did that. And one time he made this ring of bologna that he cut, and he put cheese in it and wrapped it with bacon. And I thought, man, he was so exotic, although I didn't know that word then. But instead, I opened the door, and my dad was standing in the doorway with his hands across his face. He was shaking, and he was crying. And he said, I can't take it anymore.
And what happened to him then?
My mother, God bless her, I think maybe he had some counseling before that. I'm not sure.
Well, that would be unusual during
Back
that time
then,
to even get any counseling, right? People died and you're just supposed to move on.
Buck it up. Yeah, suck it up.
But you think he had gotten some counseling?
I'm not sure.
Approximately what year would
all
this have?
I say 1960.
In the 60s, okay.
And my mother immediately called Dad's brother, his older brother, and said, I need you to come help. And she did that when Billy died, too. She called his older brother. So Mom called the brother. He picked up another brother, and the two of them came. Dad was in his recliner, and he was pinching his cheek until it was just red. My sister told me this, and I said, that seems to me like he was just trying to hang on and to feel. And his brothers walked in the living room, and they grabbed both of Dad's arms and picked him up, and they took him to the psychiatric ward, and Mom went with them.
How did he do after that?
Well, after that, he had to have shock treatments. He'd have a shock treatment, and I remember being in the waiting room one time, and he came out, and he really didn't know what was going on, and that was scary. But Dad did pretty good, but when his anxiety got too much, he would come home. Mom told me this. Didn't matter if she was washing clothes with the wringer washer or what she was doing. She'd hear him pull in the driveway. She would rush out and get in the pickup, and away they would go so he could do his work. So Mom was really the rock of our family, but that also meant that she didn't get counseling.
Nobody took care of her.
No.
She took care of everyone
Yeah.
else, and probably was incredibly grieving over the loss of her brother and her son.
Yes.
At what point did you realize that things weren't going so great for you personally coming out of this background?
Now I know it was depression.
What did you think at the time? How old were you?
I remember one time of I'll say 5th grade.
5th grade, okay.
I was crying so hard because my parents apparently, Dad had a temper. And
So that's scary too?
he could blow up and then everything would be okay. But my stomach would hurt. And I was taken to the doctor constantly for stomach aches. And finally the doctor in Del Rapids said, you know what? You just worry too much. And now I think, well, yeah, I had a lot to worry about.
Yes, you did. And now we know about the stomach-brain connection.
Yes.
We understand a lot more than this would have been
Yes.
60s.
Yeah, 60s. And, by telling those things, I hope that I'm helping parents and young kids to know that your feelings are what they are, and you deserve to have help. And not to just be written off, that you just worry too much.
So you were told not to worry so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened?
Then I just stuffed it, and I was very active and was always doing physical things and loving it. And I was a cheerleader in high school, and I dabbled in drinking, and I had 2 older sisters. And I didn't realize until recently of the extreme depression I felt when they graduated and moved away. My whole life changed. My sisters were gone. My school closed in Trent. I went from a class of 8 to Flandreau, a class of almost 80. And then my dad took a job traveling the state of South Dakota. And one day when I was in school, I was just barely 16, I got a phone call at school from my mother wondering where my father was. He was then traveling South Dakota. And I wouldn't tell her until she told me why. She wanted to know. Well, it turned out that my uncle had taken his life. And so I met my mother after school. I went over to my grandparents, and she met me, and I took her car. And I went out to my aunt's place. And this is just divine intervention, I think, because Aunt Hilda and I had a few minutes together alone. And I told her that I was sure that Uncle Nanky was in heaven. And she said, how did you get so wise? And I thought, I'm not wise at all. And that was a turning point. I always remember that time because it was a turning point. I really started drinking after that.
But don't you think that having your uncle die and seeing more sadness and grief in your family brought up all that grief that you carried with you anyway because of the loss of your brother and your other uncle who was, more like a brother to you?
Yes, very much so.
I think sometimes those triggers are just triggering things from the past. Have you ever wondered, I think your family had an unfair share of tragedy. Have you ever asked why?
Well, it's there's a little funniness in that. There's a serious part in the funniness. I had a lot of self-pity through the years, and drinking, exacerbated that. I saw a cartoon by this Chris Brown, Hagar, and he's in the boat, and he's saying, why me, God? And the next thing is saying, why not?
Yeah, why not me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not me? Why somebody else? You know?
Yeah. But the other part of that is I had many people say, everybody's had tragedies, just get over it. You need to move on. And everybody has tragedies. And this is a hard part, is I had 2 girlfriends in Trent where I grew up, and one had a mother who she loved dearly, but she had a mental illness and couldn't really care for the kids. And the other one had an absent mother. And so I felt survivor's guilt from my brother dying, but I felt survivor's guilt because I had a mom and dad.
Drinking was your drug of choice, right?
Yes.
It was easy
Yes.
to get. You were a teenager. About how old were you when you had that first drink? So alcohol was your drug of choice. At the time, I'm sure it was very easy to get. What age did you start drinking?
Well, I probably first had a drink when I was 14, and it wasn't all that easy to get, but
it's around. It was around.
Yeah, it was around. Yeah. Trent was a small town.
When you tried that, this I've heard over and over again from people who end up suffering from substance use disorder, that whatever it is, whether it be alcohol or a drug, whatever the chemical or gambling, whatever it is, the first time or the second time, first couple times they do that, to them this is like, I found my answer. This is what I've been looking for.
Relief.
Huh? Explain.
Relief of, oh my gosh, I don't have to feel the pain I was feeling. I can feel confident. I can feel happy. I can have fun until the next day. Then I felt the shame and the depression and horror. But I just want to back up and tell you, when I was it was around the time Kennedy died, I was having many times at night panic attacks. And my younger sister, who slept with me, would go into Mom and Dad and say, Lane's crying again. And so one night I was crying so hard and they could not get me to stop. And so Mother gave me a half of one of Dad's tranquilizers. And so that was an introduction that gave me some relief.
And so then after that, you were looking for relief.
Looking for relief, yeah.
Alcohol provided it, although you regretted drinking. And so it was a cycle, I assume, of drinking to not feel that shame, and then feeling the shame, and then drinking to not feel it.
And then feeling more shame.
And how many years did this go on for?
Oh, I hate to tell you, until I was 36. I fell down a flight of steps when I was 20. I was at an X-ray convention, and they had free booze. Kodak was giving out free drinks, and that was, for me, hot damn. And I fell down a flight of steps, cement steps, and a wrought iron railing, and I knocked out my front teeth. Had a concussion, was taken by ambulance to the hospital, and still I didn't think I had a problem. Nobody talked about me having alcoholism or my workplace didn't say, I think we need to get you help, because they didn't know.
Were you drinking all the time at that point?
Not all the time. It would be mainly weekends. And then I tried some marijuana, but I felt too out of control with marijuana, which is really ridiculous.
You felt in control with alcohol and out of control with weed.
Yes. Yeah. And the paranoia that marijuana gave me I didn't like that.
Any pills ever, or?
After my back injury, I was in my early 20s, 23.
And that was after falling down the stairs?
Yes. I was 23. I was an X-ray technician, and I had to help lift a man who was quadriplegic onto the X-ray table, and there was only the business manager and me to do it. I injured my back, and I had to have 3 back surgeries. So I was taking Darvon, and Valium was the big thing back then.
Not the opioids.
Right. But of course I was doing Darvon, Valium, alcohol, all of them combined. And my doctor then one day said, we need to cut you off the Valium. And I had no idea of how that was affecting me, but I had a girlfriend who would call me every single day. And she started saying, I just read this article about Valium, and I think you're having withdrawal. because I was having terrible stomach cramps and I wasn't thinking good. And
nobody prepared you for that. Nobody told you this is what withdrawal is.
no,
When we take you off this drug, this is what's going to happen.
no, but she saved me. She saved me from that withdrawal.
How?
She told me to call my doctor right away and tell him what was happening and to tell him that I needed to be titrated off of the drug instead of just whipped off it right
Like cold
away.
turkey.
Yeah. And of course the doctor didn't know I was drinking like I was.
Sure.
You know, that I thought that was a secret, which many people knew it wasn't.
During this time, did you get married, have children? What happened?
I got married when I was 23. It was right after the accident, after my back injury, and right after I fell down the stairs. And we were pregnant and did not realize that I had a procedure called a myelogram to, it was a 15 minutes of X-radiation to my genitalia area. And the doctors afterwards told me, the doctor afterwards, who was my sister's, both sisters worked for him, told me that the baby would not be right, and he recommended an abortion. I had told my husband I was already worried about the drugs I was taking for the baby, and so he was just set on it that we were having that abortion, and there wasn't anyone who backed me up and said, don't do it. After he wouldn't back me up, I started hating him, and I started drinking more.
How old were you then?
I was 24.
24.
Just a kid.
And that marriage?
And that marriage ended. Mm-hmm. It was 5.5 years, and we both drank too much. Then I tried to watch it, but I didn't know that the obsession, I was obsessed with if I drank too much, what would, I didn't want to lose another relationship. Several years after my divorce, I got remarried. It was 4 years into our marriage before I realized that I was an alcoholic.
What made you realize it, finally?
I was going to some meetings. I had gone to an Al-Anon meeting, and I had gone to some adult children of alcoholics meetings, and I heard things that really clicked with me. And I was having an inner battle about it because I didn't want to hear those things. I bought a book. I took it home. I took a day off from work as a clinic manager, and I read that book, and it hit me so hard. I was angry and threw that book down the hallway in my house. Then shortly after, I went to the Al-Anon meeting, and afterwards, my husband and a girlfriend took me to coffee. I said, hey, you guys, I think I'm an alcoholic. And they were grinning ear to ear. Now, any other time, I would have been very upset with them. But I said, how did you guys know? And Judy said, well, Owen came to us 6 months ago and said that you were kind of driving him crazy with your neediness and jealousy. And they had told Owen to just keep his hands off, let me suffer, which now we know I could have died. I've been thankful for years that Owen stood, that he let me suffer. But now I know that that is not good advice for other people.
Well, and I think that that's ingrained in our culture, that you just, back off, cut all ties, let somebody flounder around till they hit rock bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I have heard from a friend of mine, when we were trying to get my daughter help, she had lost 2 brothers to addiction. And she said, you can't wait for rock bottom. Rock bottom is death or brain damage.
Yeah.
And I believe that that is true.
Yes.
So it's an old-fashioned idea that we have. It mostly applies to alcoholism, not today's drugs and the strength of today's drugs. But after you had this conversation with your friend and your husband, did you go into treatment?
I told him, I said, what should I do? Should I go to treatment? I'll do whatever I need to do. And they said, you are so excited about this. We think you can go to 90 meetings in 90 days. So my husband has always said that I went to 120 meetings in 90 days. I was so relieved. I was just the weight of the world had come off my shoulders, and it was like, I'm not crazy. I thought I was going crazy. And I didn't know what to do about it. And I was trying to keep up this facade. You know, I was a clinic manager and I was supposed to be this professional. You know, here inside I'm going,
Your secret life.
My secret life, thinking if they only knew.
So during this time, you went to all these meetings, and did that do it for you? Did that help you recover?
It sure started me on the road to recovery, but I needed more. I went to codependency counseling. She recommended I go to a treatment thing in Minneapolis, and I got on a plane and went, and she recommended I talk to a doctor in Omaha. I went, and then there was a counseling in Kentucky.
Why do you think that you were so motivated to take all of these steps to get well?
You know, Angela, I think it has to be that innate desire that God put in my heart. Because I did not want to. I was a nursing home administrator for a while, and there was a man who would come up during devotions and want to make a confession almost every day. Now, of course, now I know he probably had dementia, some other problem. But I just thought, I cannot end up being old, sitting in a nursing home with all of that crap on me, in me. Guilt, shame, terrible shame.
So you worked through all these things. You took all these steps. Did you ever relapse?
I did not relapse.
You never relapsed?
Not with alcohol, no. I relapsed emotionally plenty of times. And
you had tough times. You
I
struggled.
had tough times. I had several times where I thought about drinking. 10 years when I found out that my oldest sister had stage 4 ovarian cancer. I was down in Texas with my husband at a meeting. And when I called home, I was talking to my mom, and she said, Jerry has stage 4 ovarian cancer. It's the worst that can be. I hung up and I turned to my husband and I said, I want a drink. And at first I was ashamed of that. Like, oh my gosh, I haven't been doing the work I'm supposed to be doing, because I'm kind of hard on myself at times. And then I was told by my spiritual director, that's how deep the pain was. When somebody wants to use, it's how deep the pain is. When I want to escape, I have those red flags of, okay, what's going on? What do you need? What do you need to do, Delaine? Do you need more fun? Do you need to go see somebody, a counselor? And
it's so much easier to reach for the drink or the drug or the food or the whatever, sex. I don't care what it is.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to distract yourself from the pain rather than to go into the pain.
Definitely. Yeah.
But that's what you had to do.
That's what I had to do. The pain was so bad. It was like I couldn't not go for help. I had to get help. And I saw my mother get help for my dad. And I saw my mother struggle without getting help. And then without having my own children, that was a pain that drove me also.
Right, not being able to have
your
own children. Sure, loss. That's another form of loss. You've had a lot of loss.
Yes.
What are you hoping that people get out of reading your story?
So wonderfully, I've been told that it touches people where their pain is at. And they can see that how I got through it and what I did to get through it, that it can help them to do the same thing. And it doesn't mean that it's easy, but I also hope that they get laughter out of it, because our family had some, during the pauses of awful things going on, we would laugh and we would, foster that in each other and tell stories. And my mom would tell stories about my little brother, things he had done, and we'd laugh about those things.
Hence the title of the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a good friend who has been on this podcast before who lost her stepson to overdose. And she read your book, and there was one particular passage within that book that really helped her. Would you like to read that to us?
I will read that. Drinking was the culmination of my childhood years marked by tragedy and death. I thought drinking helped me cope with the pain and confusion of a world that seemed destined to hurt me. I decided to take the first drink, And then alcohol decided for me. I wanted to be free of all the burdens, but instead I entered a bondage with alcohol. My belief that I could control my drinking was insane. Each time after drinking, I'd promise myself that the next time I'd do better and not drink. But then I'd do it again. She told me that it helped her have an idea of how her stepson might have been feeling.
The bondage and the hold.
Bondage. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. And you are doing more than just writing. You also are very active in helping in recovery.
Yes.
For other people.
Yes, that is extremely important for me. I am part of Communities Facing Addiction here in Sioux Falls. It's a group of churches that are working to bring down the stigma of addiction and to welcome people and to help them get the help they need. And also, for 8 years, I've been the volunteer coordinator of addiction ministry at Our Savior's Lutheran Church. And that was just a God thing, how that got started for me to be the coordinator for it. I have had people come and share their faith story about either their alcohol use, drug use, and also we've had people who love somebody. A dentist came and shared his story about his son's overdose. And we've had other people. So it's been pretty powerful in touching others. And I'm also a spiritual director. It's my passion to help people. And when I first was the volunteer coordinator and had done some events at our church, my spiritual director said to me, "You were made for this moment." And that gave me a sense of
purpose.
Purpose, yes. Yeah.
So what do you think has changed over the years? Do you think that some of the stigma is going away? What still needs to happen?
I think as we continue to talk about it, what you're doing, going out and talking to multiple groups, bringing the awareness and getting past the don't talk about it thing, that is huge. And having forums where we get people to come and talk and tell their stories. I believe faith stories are just so powerful, how we get past things. So what else can be done? I think, in the media, more positive things of, this is why I'm saying this. When I was a kid growing up, I was scared to death because of Jack Kennedy's assassination, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the Bay of Pigs. I just felt like nobody was in charge at all. And I feel for our kids nowadays, of all that they're hit with constant media and everything, and it's a big, big project, but more hope and more stories of somebody making it through, or just maybe if not making it through, it's like you telling of what has happened with your family and what can be done different. I think that's huge.
Well, thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for writing the book and for the ministries that you've taken on and for just sharing your story. It means so much.
Thank you, Angela.
I believe we can all learn from each other as we walk through life, and by sharing our suffering, we can lessen the suffering of others. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. To read my blogs and join us in our mission, just go to Emily's Hope at paintingapathttorecovery.org. Also, please rate and review this podcast. Thank you.